Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl, and here we are for another one of our Warhammer The Old World faction focus. We started the first one with the Dark Elves, and now we're going to be looking at the Tomb Kings. Now this is all about looking at the 8th edition army book, their rules, and the flavour of each of the units to see how they might play in Warhammer The Old World. So for example, if you've got an elite infantry unit that's very durable, despite the fact the rules would be different, you'd expect the same unit to be elite infantry and very durable in most cases. So we do have, there you go, that's my Tomb Kings 8th edition army book. That's what I'm basing everything upon, and it will follow the same format as we did for the Dark Elves. Now, the Tomb Kings during 8th edition were probably one of the worst armies, if not the worst army, in terms of performance. They had interesting rules, they had some interesting model kits and releases, but in terms of power level, they were not great. So that's kind of the baseline we're starting from, and hopefully this will be rectified with the Old World and the new releases. And Tomb Kings, of course, being on the what I call the inside of Warhammer the Old World, as in that they will get a full release and they're part of the narrative and everything else, as opposed to the Dark Elves, which just get a legend style set of rules. So we're starting with the Lords, so let's take a look at the first one. So Tomb King's Lord, and the picture you see there is the Lord that actually comes with the Kemrian War Sphinx, where you can either use a crew in a howdah with 4 Tomb Guard, or you can make it a mount for the Tomb King. If you make it like I did with the howdah and the crew, then you get to use this Tomb King on foot. So looking at the Tomb King himself, he gets pretty good weapon skill, strength, toughness and leadership, but low movement, ballistic skill and initiative, and certainly those low stats are pretty common throughout the entire army. Now, looking at his equipment, he's got a hand weapon and light armour, and he does get options for a great weapon, a flail, a spear and a shield for extra points. Note there's no option there for heavy armour, and you'll see there's no option for heavy armour throughout the entire book. And bearing in mind this army is incredibly slow, durability is an issue. Mount options, you can put him on a skeleton chariot or a Kemrian War Sphinx. Personally, if I was going to put him on a mount, then I'd put him on the War Sphinx. Though if you're going to lean heavily into chariots, then you could put him on a chariot and buff that unit. But you know, there's I think most people were using them on foot. Special rules, he does come with one, which is the Curse D6 strength 4 hits to a unit which kills him, essentially. It's of a limited value rule, because of course if you've just lost your Tomb King, then to do D6 strength 4 hits, does it really matter at that point? I'm not a big fan of rules like this on big expensive models. You know, if it's like a fight on death for a unit, that's different, but you know, these rules, taking a special rule on a big expensive model, not ideal. He does also take double wounds from flaming attacks, and that's pretty common for Tomb King characters. He does get My Will Be Done. Now, this is a really good rule, and this is a unit buffing rule, so that the unit that he's with gains his weapon skill. So where you've got units of skeletons, Tomb Guard and so on with their low weapon skill, he's now given them weapon skill 6, so at least you've got a much better chance to hit. Now, pretty much every unit in the Tomb King book gets the Nehekaran Undead special rule. Now, this gives you a whole host of things. It makes you unbreakable and immune to psychology. So, you know, your units aren't going to break. They're not going to flee. So, you know, most of the time the enemy does have to kill them off. But with that comes unstable. Now, unstable means that they take 1 additional wound for every point they lose combat by. They do cause fear, which means that enemy units in base contact must take a leadership test, and if they fail, they get -1 weapon skill. But no, the Tomb King units can never march. Right, so there's no option for them to march. That is huge in terms of limiting the mobility of this army, and they can only hold as a charge reaction. So, I mean, I the theme of undead not panicking, not running away, absolutely. The crumbling mechanic, yep, totally get that. The lack of being able to march is a real issue for the army that just doesn't have the durability to back it up, and that is an issue. So in terms of the 8th edition meta in my local area, it generally favoured larger units as opposed to monsters, so you didn't really see Tomb Kings on mounts that often, and if you did it would be, say on the War Sphinx, but that wasn't that common. Normally you'd see him in a unit of Tomb Guard, giving the Tomb Guard weapon skill 6, Tomb Guard pretty good overall. But the fact they can't march, movement 4, makes the army and the unit movement ridiculously low, and you could just avoid the units. Often the enemy are going to choose when they're going to attack. So you'd always have at least one of these Tomb Kings in your army. Sometimes 2, depending on what you're going for. Maybe 1 on foot with your Tomb Guard, and then another one in a chariot or a War Sphinx, for example. Often you might see people more likely to take 1 Tomb King and then 2 Tomb Princes to keep those costs down. That is our Tomb King. Now moving on to the second Lord in the army book, which is the Leash High Priest, and you can see the original older model there. So stats, all stats are low except leadership, as you'd expect from a caster lord. He only gets a hand weapon, so no other equipment options, and as normal for a caster lord, level 3, or you can make him level 4 with points. And he does have the option for Law of Nehekara, Law of Light or Death. However, to be the Hierophant, so your highest level caster that has the Law of Nehekara must be the Hierophant, and we'll talk about what that confers in a bit, but you must have the Law of Nehekara to be the Hierophant. So if you're a level 4 a Light or Death Wizard, he can't be the Hierophant. You can put him on a skeletal steed, though you wouldn't normally do this. You'd hide him in a block of infantry, normally archers, and he does come with only a single special rule of Nehekar and Undead, so no major bonuses in his casting or anything there. So overall, he's an okay caster lord that must be the army's Hierophant if he's taking Law of Nehekara. Now, what that gives you is he does give 6+ regeneration to him and his unit if he is the Hierophant. However, the main downside is if he's destroyed, every unit on the battlefield, every friendly unit on the battlefield must take a leadership test, which if you fail, you take the number of wounds equal to the number that you failed by, with no saves at all allowed, including ward saves. So this did happen to me a few times where he was sniped out, and suddenly you're taking leadership tests across the board, you're taking wounds across the board, and sometimes if you roll badly, it can be very nasty. What that means is he becomes the number 1 target on the battlefield. He's very difficult to protect. He's not tough, so you're hiding him in a unit, but he's very vulnerable to sniping abilities. He's vulnerable to being challenged, which means you're putting a lot of points into protect him. So those points are essentially just lost in protecting him, with magic items, with troops, and so on. One thing you do get, though, with going down the Law of Nehekara route is every successful Nehekaran spell that is a buff to a unit also recover D3 plus 1 wounds, not models, but it does mean it does work on multiple wound models. And 4 of the 7 spells, which is the 6 and the signature spell, so 4 of those are augments. So there's 4 Nehekaran spells that will allow this to happen. But yeah, in reality, magic items really required to make usable as a usable general / hierophant, which does then make him an expensive character. Normally you'd have one high priest backed up by a couple of priest heroes to give that extra casting, and as I say, normally you'd put him in a unit of something like archers where they can stay behind the main line but still have impact on the battle. Just have to watch out for those fast cavalry units coming round the flanks, or flying units which go straight into him, and it is a problem in the way that army works. And if I think about how that might work in Tomb Kings in the old world, it's definitely something they're going to have to be careful of, because it did have a major impact. So, and I like crumbling, I get the whole point of having your hierophant or army general, start to cause issues if he is killed. But it did have a massive impact on weakening the Tomb King's army overall and power level. And there you go. That's it for the Tomb King Lords. I hope that's given you an idea on how those lords look and how they then might play in Warhammer The Old World. There's only 2 lords in the Tomb King roster. We had 4 in the Dark Elf, but there's only 2 in the Tomb King roster. So next up will be the heroes. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, though, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments down below. And as always, if you want to see more content, please hit that subscribe button. It's totally free for you to do. Means a lot for me, so thank you for that in advance. You've been watching The Ghost Hour. Tune back in for our next Tomb King's Faction Focus episode.